to switch off your handbell or to put on silent your handbells and mobile phones, except for the town crier, who is exempt. I am pleased to welcome and introduce to you Louise Stewart, the CEO of Chester Race Company. Well, yes, do it by all means. One of the gas ambassadors who will open the event and perhaps tell us why she thinks gas is exceedingly important.
To get 2 applauses before I've said a word is unprecedented. Welcome to the second Chester Great and Small gathering. Gas has a huge but fabulous ambition to make Chester the most livable city in Europe. And we're gathering today to check in on progress just 1 year later. Now, having moved to Chester just 2 years ago to take up my role at Chester Race Company and the responsibility for the oldest operating racecourse in the world, in what is already a fabulous and historic city, I was delighted, if a little bit surprised, to be asked to open today's session. So I suppose I'm speaking to you really not as the CEO of the race company per se, but as a newcomer to the city, and also as someone who has spent a large part of my career in placemaking and regeneration, place promotion, heritage and tourism, and I've worked at a senior level in public, private and third sectors. And now when I say that aloud, I realise how old that makes me sound, but I suppose it's because I've just been around a bit. And when I came to Chester, I was welcomed like I'd been welcomed in no other place by a group of people who wanted me to know stuff. They wanted me to understand the importance of the racecourse to the city, why I needed to engage with the local community and the city stakeholders, but also what they hoped the racecourse would be, could be, and should be. How rude and patronising, you might think, but not at all. This was a rich vein of insight, knowledge and expertise that was invaluable. Stuff it would have taken me months to find out and understand, if ever. A group of people who cared about the city and were a font of knowledge and connections. But they were frustrated. They were frustrated at the lack of collaboration in the city, lack of information being shared, and most of all, the lack of progress. And I sat in a basement with them. It was a very lovely one, as Chester has many. And I listened to their frustrations, mainly institutions and organisations for not listening or acting. And I was reminded of the many cities that I've worked in and on, and the places I have had a tiny hand in developing over the years. And the fact that it was people, groups of people forming just like that in basements that made change happen. Whether that was to get behind a single project, to join projects together to create a bigger whole, to advocate for increased funding settlements, or to drive a bigger strategic plan over decades to fruition. It was effectively a regime of determined people and aligned thinking. And that's what actually has made change happen in most of the places I've been involved with or observed over the years. Whether that be Newcastle, Manchester, Bristol, Durham, York or Salisbury, they were always regimes of people. There were also slow starts and setbacks. And some projects I envisaged at the beginning are only now being delivered 20 years later. But I was responsible for delivering projects in my time that had been envisaged 20 years before I got there. But they are being delivered because good projects, the best projects, will find that winning combination eventually. I used to say when the stars align and the timing and funding come together, but I've come to realise that that makes it sound magical, and it's anything but. What really happens is that determined groups of people keep the faith. They doggedly fight for causes and they make sure that more people come on board, that key organisations take into account the wider needs of the places that they impact on, and that businesses and organisations know what's going on in their places and understand the plans of others and consider it in their own plans. They adapt to circumstances, but they never seem to stop. They have a tenacity that is enviable. And where it works best is when people collaborate and share information, knowledge, and expertise, and particularly where politicians advocate for good projects and put political affiliations aside for the good of the places they represent and serve. And when public and private sector stop arguing and work on aligning their plans, and when businesses and individuals donate their expertise, time, and funds to projects or groups needing their support. And the reason I joined GAS was because of the people I met when I came to Chester. They were already forming GAS, and it was developing in a way, an organic way, a necessary way that I could get on board with. I didn't know how I could be useful to it or it to me at the time. Collaboration takes time and it takes patience. So if you're sat during today's session thinking not a lot has happened, then I would just remind you that GAS has virtually no funding. It relies on the generosity of lots of people's time, goodwill, and love for this city. It might be you that holds a key piece of the jigsaw. So please do take the chance to network, speak to people that you wouldn't normally speak to, meet the people in the room to find out where you can assist or perhaps who can assist you with a project. Chester, I found, is brimming with amazing organisations, brilliant people, and it has a tremendously rich fabric to work with. Looking around the room, I definitely see the rich and beating heart of a city. It's an embarrassment of riches that exist in Chester. Really is. Imagine what could be achieved if we shared more information with each other and put our combined weight even behind just a few projects to make Chester as good as it can possibly be and move further towards that goal of being the most livable city in Europe. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, fellow Ambassador Louise, for opening. It's not every evening that one gets the Woman of the Year 2024 from Downtown in Business Awards to do that. So thank you very much indeed. Louise has to shoot off, so with that apology, thank you very much. Okay, couple of caretaking announcements, housekeeping announcements. The event is being videoed tonight and will be edited and will be published on our website to circulate what we present tonight to a wider audience. If anyone is uncomfortable with that, then please don't feel pressurised to stay. That's my nice way of saying I can't really do anything about it. So thank you for your tacit approval to that. And for those who haven't seen it, last year's event was also videoed, and that too is up on our website. Obviously, I think I'd probably known to everybody in the room, I'm Tim Kenny. I chair this loose amalgamation of cats that is Chester Great and Small. And of course, as Louise alluded to earlier, this did start off really in the back room of basements. It feels a bit like a scene from Les Miserables, except the fact I have no intention of getting shot on the battlements, on the barricades. Thank you for being here today, for giving it your time on a moist Maundy Thursday. Before I get into my chairman's bit, I just want to run through a little bit about tonight's lineup. We're delighted to welcome best-selling author Andy Spinoza, whose book Manchester Unspun tells his personal story and that of his adopted city Manchester through the last 40 years of its inspirational regeneration, starting with the legendary Hacienda nightclub being the catalyst for change. More of that later. Following Andy, our original hope was to have Delith Curtis, the recently appointed Chief Executive Officer of Cheshire West and Chester Council, to give us some insight into the current economic climate of the council, with the increasing recognition that there is a need for collaboration and support from the private sector. I think this would probably have been the first time that Delith had the opportunity to speak to an audience of people from the private sector, and this microphone could really do with a pop filter. Unfortunately, earlier this month, the council entered PERDA, that's the pop filter, which for those of you unfamiliar with the term means the period of time pre-election with heightened sensitivity, where there are specific restrictions on communications activity taking place. So, as Delith in her role as CEO is also the returning officer for the forthcoming Police and Crime Commissioner election, she's had no option to duck out with her apologies. However, the good news is that Simon Riley, Chief Operating Officer, is here to give us that update. But because of PERDA, won't be able to take part in the Q&A at the end. But thank you for coming along, Simon. Appreciate that. Following Simon's bit, there'll be an opportunity to meet some of our team leads, and my colleague Izzy Gray will run a bit of a Q&A, hopefully picking up on some of the themes that will be emerging through the course of the evening. At the end of that, my ever-enthusiastic gas Vice Chairman Tony Swindells will close the proceedings with a call to action and minds the pint. There will be an opportunity, of course, to chat to all of us afterwards, and don't forget to buy a copy of Andy's book. So before turning to look at what gas has been up to over the past year, I want to quickly pan out and take a more macro look before zooming back in on Chester itself. These post-Brexit and post-pandemic times are uncertain in a world with a changing climate, a growing population, wars in Europe and the Middle East. And then, of course, we have to be aware of the Northern Powerhouse context, especially given the cancellation of HS2 and what that means to the whole Northern connectivity sector. Earlier this month in Cannes, at the Europe International Property Expo MIPIM, there were some very definite and recurring European themes popping up. And I want to stress this, it's not just a Chester thing, these are European themes. And these are more focused on people rather than what has traditionally been the case about focusing on buildings. So things like the housing crisis is not just a UK problem. Co-living is regarded as taboo outside of London. That's interesting. Homelessness is increasingly being recognised with options of how to try and resolve that. And of course, the climate that we're operating in investment terms, makes development very difficult. And you've got a base rate of 5.25%, and you've got things like 30% affordable housing, community interest levies, so on and so forth, reluctance for banks to lend into the property development sector. It makes it very difficult to get stuff done. And of course, devolution, giving the nation's city regions more control over their destiny. Really? Another notable theme that came out of this European property conference is culture breeds capital. Interesting, not the other way around. Culture breeds capital. So places lacking in the culture stakes will find it much harder than those culturally rich locations to prosper in the face of that economic uncertainty. So whilst Chester wasn't represented at MIPIM, that last theme is particularly encouraging for our city and the potential for future investment. Okay, especially remembering the 4 planks of any successful place are built up of live, work, learn, play. They're all over our gas website, as I'm sure you know. A quick reminder of what is gas. Okay, I'm often asked that question, and sometimes I have to think, well, actually, what is a good question? Legally, gas sits as a community interest company. That sits in somewhere between a limited company and a charity, and we do that so that we can open a bank account and hold funds. As it happens, our money and our funds. We're part a lobby group. We're part a think and do tank. We're a movement. And when we set it up, we wanted to bring about positive change. We wanted to create an awesome and collaborative city. We wanted to see Chester become the best place to live, work, learn and play. And we anticipated that we could do that by being private sector, independent and business orientated. We wanted it to be Chester City focused. We want gas to be a network of networks. We're a think and facilitation organisation. We're a space for turning ideas into projects. We're certainly a collaboration space where we start to break down the silo mentality that Chester has had for the last 20 or 30 years. And by doing that, hopefully we can focus on helping deliver solutions to some stuck projects. Where we can be, we think we're resourced, agile, accountable, transparent, and we think that we're a critical friend to the council. Hopefully they think that too. Who's involved in gas? Well, as Louise mentioned, when we launched a year ago, we had about a dozen ambassadors. We now have 37 and counting. These 37 people across businesses and organisations, great and small, are all giving up their time free of charge for the benefit of trying to move Chester forward on the world stage, working together in a way they weren't before, because there simply wasn't previously a space to connect the dots. I'd like at this juncture to recognise the support that my gas ambassadors have given me as chair. Can I ask all the gas ambassadors to stand up, please? See? They sit amongst you. And they genuinely didn't know that was coming either, right? Being a gas ambassador is not a badge of fame. It's bloody hard work. And the expectations of the group are that everyone will shoulder some responsibility and get stuck in. And if anyone in the room that hasn't stood up thinks this is for them, get in here. I should warn you though, change is hard and we need people who want to work hard. And another word of warning, gas has no money, it has no paid staff, we have nowhere near enough time to do all the amazing stuff we want to. But we all contributed personally, financially to cover the costs, as well as our time away from our businesses. In the case of us self-employed ambassadors, gas costs us opportunity time, which costs me and my fellow gas ambassadors real money. I would ask paid and employed representatives of other organisations sat here today to bear that in mind and be reciprocal in their collaborations and look inwards to the mindsets and skill sets that we have right here in Chester. We don't need to look outside Chester for external help and advice, but what we do need to do is to start working smarter and faster. What gas does is maximise the benefit from joining up these businesses. We cross-fertilise. 37 organisations represented here. Our assets are our people, our knowledge, and as Louise mentioned earlier, our enthusiasm. But just think about it. In 2 or 3 clicks of a mouse, we can cover thousands of invested people like never before. This only works if everyone plays fair. And so far, we've had great support and reciprocity from our partners and players, and I hope we continue to do so. So if we say gas isn't a delivery vehicle, well, how can we be? We've got no money and no administration. What are we? What can we do? How do we go about things? When we first set this up, we set ourselves 3 planks. The first thing we said we'd do is, let's find out what we already know. What reports have been published into all sorts of things that have been stuck in drawers, forgotten about, put in the too difficult drawer because it's too difficult. So we've done our best to take those reports out, and they're all published on our gas website. What do we do with those reports? Well, let's see what's in them and work out how we can actually invigorate those reports to make and help some stuff done. So we take that knowledge and we actually do with it what those reports were intended to do. And then the third thing we said we would do is to support the one city plan, to try to make some transformative change across the city. And tick, 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 I think in that, and we've only been going a year. Now, it's easy to talk Chester down, we all do it, but let's look at some of Chester's positives over the year. And when I sat down to do this, it's quite interesting. In just a year, we now have multi-screen picture house cinema open. The University of Chester is developing its ownership on Northgate Street. Storyhouse has opened its youth theatre. The Cathedral has launched Project Discovery. Barclays Bank has invested across the road in a new site as a consequence of that. The Townhouse Hotel has been completely refitted. We've got new openings and new restaurants in Bohème and 200 Degrees Coffee and many others. The O Foundation has opened its first concept store and atelier space, which is now providing an outlet and a workspace for over 15 creative startups in the city. Browns and Chester and the Grosvenor Centre, of course, continue to have their own problems. We understand they've got some interesting conversations. Not privy to those, but let's hope they can bring those forward in the next year. Chester City Gateway and the Bourton Canal Corridor are projects being led by the council. And in the pipeline, some derelict buildings are coming back into use. Metro Bank is opening in the town. Starbucks are opening a second site. Gale's Bakery is shop fitting on Bridge Street. The exciting idea for the top of the Pepper Street car park with the rooftop hospitality and events venue will hopefully open in the next 3 months, and that'll be fantastic. Do I have a vested interest? Yep. Wilds Hotels back on site on the 8th of April. Thank you to the council for speed tracking their scaffolding application. So that will be back on track and hopefully opening next year. 18-room boutique hotel, 5-star, which means we could also get to grips with the 4 shop units underneath, which are currently struggling. And then, of course, there's some longer-term pipeline projects, including the Grosvenor Shopping Centre, which I talked about, Bourton Corridor, and the Railway Gateway Design Booth. There's stuff happening. Let's turn to the One City Plan 2.0. This is most definitely not the be and end all of gas, but this evening's theme is about the power of collaboration. It's not about the One City Plan, it's about celebrating the positive wins gas has embraced, empowered and endorsed. And maybe think about what's next for gas with your help. I wanted to touch on the One City plan because it frames much of the space that we're working in. And you'll have an opportunity to quiz the working group leaders later in the Q&A and at the bar. Definitely the bar. I can't say the last 12 months has been either speedy or agile, but it has yielded results. Gas ambassadors are now either leads or co-leads in 4 of the 5 groups. And of course, unless these groups actually do something, it's academic. So it's really critical that these One City plan groups add value, and there's a mechanism for scoring those wins, and that the council support them with resource, policy change and action. This is all about connecting Chester. And this time last year, this wasn't the case. It's not who we have in the groups that's important. It's what those groups do to embrace, empower and endorse the many projects and interventions that will make Chester truly awesome. A couple of words on our relationship with council. It's fair to say that we are both finding our way, and as chair of something so fragile and unstructured as gas, it's evident that bringing together the public and private sectors is bloody hard work. But what makes 2024 and gas different is the landscape in which we're working. And Simon will tell us more about the council's thoughts and views shortly. I would ask you to remember that both he and his CEO Delith only took up office in 2023. So all of us are new to this venture. We're all still finding our way, and I think we're getting better at it. Transformative change can only happen when we realise that councils rarely move at a pace that the private sector can. But what we can do is remove the tripwires, be a critical friend in a supportive and safe environment, and it's in that environment where we create new opportunities. So moving forwards, gas will continue to evolve, it'll create new opportunities, and these 3 words embrace, empower and endorse many projects. That kind of segues me into a conversation about Creative Chester. We realised early on in our gas journey that what Chester lacked was some kind of strapline. We don't have a brand, we don't have a DNA, we don't have an identity. Let's remember that phrase that I mentioned earlier, coming back from MIPIM. Culture creates capital. Culture creates capital, not the other way around. So Chester's always been a creative place, and what we now need to do is to use that creativity to drive positive change. So what's gas done? Well, we've sort of divided up by what we've done into 3 things. The first thing is those topics and projects that we've done that we call embraced by gas. Okay, these are things that we have done from scratch. We drove these. So the first thing is the O Design Foundation. I say a little bit about that. This is a collaboration of Chester Racecourse, who own the building, working in collaboration with Tony and Monica and the team behind the O Foundation and the university, and lots of other supporters, including Storyhouse and others. This whole thing came about as a result of the connections that were made in the gas environment. This is the start of something really special, but this will need fostering. It's a small seed, it will need watering, and it will need lots of help and support. But we did that. Reimagining the Rose. Right, this is a project which these 4 gentlemen put together. So Councillor Richard Beecham was really keen to drive this forward. My 3 gas ambassador colleagues there, Tony Guy and the other Tony, have put together a working document of how to bring back into commercial use difficult buildings. Right, because when you start looking at how to adapt buildings, it's a bit like playing a game of pinball. I'll try and use words that don't start with a P. It's trying to get a game of pinball. You know, you talk to the conservation officer, talk to the planning officer, you get pinged across to the building control officer, who pings you across to somebody else in environmental health. You've gone around the corner and not actually finished the game. So the idea behind this is to create a council-approved document that says, this is how you do it. That's my only bit of singing you're going to get. Right? Reimagining the Rose. We did that. And the Chester Green Weekend. What the Chester Green Weekend is we've created something from things that were already there. This is an amalgamation of the Active Travel Festival. It's the incorporation of Chester. Help me out here. Thank you very much. Chester Green Expo. There you go. And Eco Communities. Thank you very much. See what I do? I'm hopeless without a script. So we pulled all these together. This was all happening But all these organisations and people are doing brilliant stuff, but all trying to work in the same space. So gas has actually given that opportunity for these 3 organisations to come together and work together and do this. So coming up, brand new to Chester, 14th to 16th of June, a weekend of green orientated stuff. See Helen outside, she's got some giveaways. She's also looking for some financial support. Okay, we need money for this, guys, right? So that's the stuff that's embraced by gas. We did this. Let's look at something that's empowered by gas. These are things where we've been able to lend a bit of a shoulder to a wheel. Digital Chester. This is the thing which comes out time and time again as one of Chester's biggest problems, right? Trying to use our mobile phones and connectivity and Wi-Fi around the city. It's bloody awful. Turns out there was a report done in 2019 with 90 grand's worth of allocated funds. What happened in 2019? We know. So this report got stuck in a drawer. We've encouraged that report to be taken out, refreshed, and now we're working through one of the working group streams in collaboration with the council and with Business Improvement District, the BID, to look at a project of what we need to do to digitise Chester. Once we know what we want to do with it, we can then work about how that happens. But again, we're not claiming credit for this, but we are claiming credit for perhaps encouraging it to be brought out of the drawer and made a little bit more public. The welcome mat. I mentioned this earlier with my analogy of the pinball machine. Investing in Chester is really difficult because it's not connected. And this is a phrase which I will give credit to my fellow gas ambassador Andy Farrell for coming up with. And it's our suggestion to the council that we encourage them to work on major projects with some senior officers so that we can get some very quick delivery resolution. So when you come to Chester with a bag full of cash and you want to invest in a project, you don't get caught in the pinball machine. And that's had a really warm reception from Simon and his colleagues. It's work in progress, but we can all see the immediate benefits for that. We can get stuff done faster, and that's in everyone's benefit to do that. So it's a shoulder to the wheel job. And then lastly, the Chester app. My colleague, Gas Ambassador Rob, been playing around with this. I'm sorry, that's terrible. Has been working his what's-its off for this for a long, long time, and we've got behind Rob and we've given him a bit of support, and we helped get this a bit more airplay. Hopefully you've all downloaded it. Rob's outside with some more information afterwards. Please go and talk to him. You know, if the future of Chester is digital, then we need an app, right? Is this finished? No, it's very impressive, and this has the opportunity to do lots of other things. So please talk to Rob and engage with Rob. Stuff that's endorsed by gas. This is stuff where other people have projects, and all we've done is bring those 37 ambassadors and give it a bit more daylight. And those are largely heritage projects. And again, we've got the Hydro Hub. We've got, Chester Castle. Where do we start with? Chester Castle, thank you. We've got Chester Castle. This bit is languishing around for ages. My gas ambassador colleague, Tony, has done lots of work on this over the years. But because it's a multi-owned site, no one's actually been able to get any traction with the owners. You've got the council in here, you've got the university in here, you've got English Heritage, you've got the Crown Estate, and it goes on. And no one's actually been able to lead the project. So what we've been able to do is just give it a bit of, shine a torch on it and give it a bit of oomph and try and get this back onto some kind of structure. Okay. And then where am I going now? Hydro Hub. Again, absolutely not claiming credit for this. Neil's been working really hard with this. But again, it's great. The idea of bringing this back, fantastic. Just needs everyone to get behind these projects, start talking them up and seeing how they can help. And lastly, D-House. Well, we know this is hiding in plain sight. Grade 2 listed building sat on top of a scheduled ancient monument. It could only be Chester, right? But again, there was a way forward that Tony Barton put in a report a year ago, sadly. But again, with the power of gas, we've managed to get that out in a bit more airplay, and there has to be a resolution to this. Might not necessarily agree with what that resolution is, but we can't have this, okay? So again, it's what can we all do to get these stuck projects moving? It's all about creative, collaborative Chester. Needs vision and policy support. So, I'm getting to the end of this, you'll be pleased to know. Right, so with all credit to Louise, who came up with this, quote, "Gas owns nothing, but shares everything. We're a network of networks. What we are doing is about Chester, not about gas. All right, that's that bit there. Right, so here to tell us about the regeneration and rise of Manchester to become an international destination for culture and sport, and one of the fastest growing urban regions in Europe, is Andy Spinoza. I have his book. I've read his book. It's absolutely fascinating. I have 2 sentences to bring out before I pass on. This is page 303. Right? It's not just Chester that suffers these sort of issues. Let me just read this. In 2002, Warren Smith, who for LPC Living had transformed 2 rundown tower blocks in Liverpool into key worker flats, compared his experiences. I can see Howard, that's Howard Bernstein, Howard for breakfast in the Midland Hotel anytime I need to. But when I write a polite letter to Liverpool Council's chief executive, I don't even get a reply. And then the other comment that I thought would resonate was good. Is this, and again it's at Manchester. So even so, the city centre in the 1990s was still largely hollowed out. Its economic decline made the penny drop. Manchester's potent past as a globaliser was over. Its status was now as another second-tier European city fighting for visitors, publicity and investment. Does that sound familiar? So without further ado, over to Andy. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Thanks, Tim. Can people hear me at the back? Okie dokie. Just bear with me one moment. Yeah, my book is full of that kind of tangy revelation that Tim's just talked about there. Because I suppose my specialist subject on Mastermind would be Manchester City Centre 1980 to 2024. But you're probably thinking, what's this Londoner doing talking about Manchester? He says Manchester. Well, I have been in Manchester since 1979. I came as a student. I've had a 40-year career in the city in journalism, PR, and people call me an adopted Mancunian. I prefer to call myself a Mancocknian. There is such a thing, and therefore I've been close to the Manchester resurrection, reinvention of the city. I suppose for Chester people it's a bit of a noisy neighbour, and you may wonder what's going on now up the road, looking at the changes there and wondering how that has happened. I've been part of that process, and I think it's probably worth starting with this end of last year, like a banner year for Manchester, because the Chanel luxury goods brand.
I'm so sorry, I don't hear very well.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Maybe I could be that nearer me. The Chanel luxury goods brand came into Manchester for a catwalk show, and wanting a bit of Manchester authenticity, they put a catwalk fashion show outside a street of 18th century weavers' cottages, and the English National Opera announced it was relocated to Manchester. And even 5 years ago, this kind of interest in Manchester would have been unthinkable. I'd like to next slide, please. That to me speaks very much, that social media meme of Bette Lynch of Coronation Street speaks to this kind of culture clash of the old Manchester and Salford. I just thought we'd sort of pause on that before I get into the serious stuff. Next slide. This was the Manchester GMX railway station, 1979, the year I arrived, and this is now today the Manchester Central Convention Centre, where the Conservative Party holds its conferences, and Labour too. Northern Quarter, very fashionable district, was what it looked like. That was also 79. The next photo, Castlefield. You notice I say Castlefield. These are what these areas look like now. That's the Convention Centre, Northern Quarter, and Castlefield. And Manchester in '79 was probably known for these things. You know, how was the city perceived around the world? If you went to most foreign countries, they didn't speak English. If they heard you were from Manchester, they would shout at you, Bobby Charlton, because of the '66 World Cup success. Coronation Street, George Best. Yes, the railway, first passenger railway station in the world. But this is what Manchester was trading on in that sort of global battle for interest that Tim just alluded to. I had some research done for my book. Manchester city centre, more or less the year I arrived, 5 towers over 20 stories. There are those purple dots, including the Co-op Tower, which was the tallest tower in the tallest building in the country when it was built in 1961. The next slide shows, oh, and by the way, only 500 people living in the city centre. They were mainly night watchmen and caretakers living on business premises. Fast forward to today, if we just go back, yes, fine. 75,000 people living in the centre, probably 250,000 people in the sort of outer areas where actually they're living in Salford and Trafford, but you come from London or China and go into Manchester, you go to Manchester United, you go to Salford Quays, you don't know you're in another borough. To those people, it's all Manchester. The city centre sort of spilling out from in all directions. And before we move on, 55 towers over 20 stories. That there's a pipeline of construction and already approved developments that will see by 2030 that total will be 110 towers over 20 stories, which is definition of a tower, by the way, over 20 stories. So incredible change, incredible transformation. That's what Manchester looks like now. In terms of that's what people talk about when they go to Manchester, and my book really looks at the role of culture in this transformation, because thinking about it, these buildings cost a lot of money. Boardrooms around the world have green lighted investment in Manchester. UK pension funds, US corporations, Far East listed companies, sovereign wealth funds across the world, people have looked at Manchester and said, we want to put our money into this place, into that place that we looked at a few minutes ago with those that was crumbling, derelict post-industrial city. So how did that happen? Well, this is how Manchester promotes itself around the world. Well, the New York subway has posters. Manchester, a city that picks table is for dancing on. So there's an awareness there that, excuse me, I'm a bit croaky. I've been talking to so many people before this talk. There's awareness that Manchester has a reputation as a party city, and the hotel pipeline is also as remarkable as the residential towers. Culture is the new economy in Manchester. You have 2 huge building spaces setting up. One on the right is the Factory International, also known as the Aviva Studios, costing £240 million, opened last year, for cutting edge culture, dividable spaces, but 7,000 overall capacity. On the left, you have Co-op Live, which is opening in a month or two's time. Next to the Manchester City ground, 28,000 capacity, £385 million investment from US and Middle East sources. And I suppose possibly other cities around Manchester are thinking, my God, how do we compete with this? This is the state of play in Manchester in 2024. I trace this process back in my book to very different DIY, street level, homegrown culture. I trace it back to the band Joy Division, whose music was intense, powerful, mysterious, troubled, and I suppose very much the essence of Manchester at the time, the late 70s. People said their sort of doomy, mysterious music sounded like Manchester. How can music sound like a city? But that music probably couldn't have come from any other place and at any other time than Manchester in the late 70s. And the imagery that went with the band and the lyrics, this guy Ian Curtis, who was the lead singer, lyricist who committed suicide in May 1980, created a kind of a legend and a myth around the band. And that legend and myth was kind of expressed in design, artwork terms by the designer Peter Saville, and it made lots of money. They sold more records than they expected to. They suddenly became very, very wealthy people. I'm talking about directors of Factory Records and New Order, which came out of Joy Division. Next slide. With that money, they didn't go to Monaco, become tax exiles, or even the Isle of Man, or fate worse than death, go to London. They thought their city was the greatest city in the world, and it had fallen so low, and they were so gutted about it. Out of an excess of city pride, they opened a club called Hacienda, which was like a spaceship landing in early 80s Manchester in 1982. It was like nothing else in the world. It had all this post-industrial design features, and it put Manchester on the map in many ways. It was chaotically run, and it lost a fortune over its 15 years. It's calculated to have lost £18 million. Now, that was these Manchester entrepreneurs, artists, misfits, intellectuals, crazies. This was their money. No Arts Council grants were applied for. They did not want to be subject to agendas. It was very creative, provocative kind of place. But in my opinion, it was the starting point, fired the starting gun. It was the start of the process that led to Manchester's regeneration, because at that time no one was doing anything in the city centre. There were no there was nothing for creative people, and property was relatively cheap, and they opened this club as a gift to Manchester. They said it was a lab experiment in popular culture. So these were driven by culture purely, and not by commercial, with any commercial sense, actually. Because if anyone knows anything about the chaotic accounting methods, it was arts for art's sake. Okay. Yeah, this kind of artwork, which we now see almost as a cliche, apparently they're also Joy Division oven gloves, that kind of thing, which upsets the purists. It kind of gave Manchester a charisma and an aura and mystery around the world. People who appreciate good design, interesting culture, fell under the spell of Manchester over time. This kind of artwork. On the left is the floppy disk design for Blue Monday, the reputedly the best-selling 12-inch single of all time by New Order, and the complicated, so it resembles a floppy disk, for those who remember floppy disks, and the complicated cutout the sleeve meant that every copy they sold, they lost money on because the cover was so expensive to produce. A very, very factory records. True Faith by New Order also now. What do you notice? No words, no band name on the cover, no information, just pure art. This kind of approach made Manchester famous. On the right, Newsweek magazine, 1990, wanted to write about and splashed their front cover story on the Manchester music scene. And this showed the council, local authority, and the other kind of public agencies that actually they were sitting on something homegrown, something that they weren't driving. It was just coming up organically from the streets, but it was getting Manchester international attention. In the days when magazines were important, Newsweek was a huge, it was the mainstream magazine right across America. So you can imagine any city's politicians and bureaucrats would be loving the kind of profile that the Manchester music scene was getting. And so over time, the city's icons, those George Best and Coronation Street, were kind of being replaced by a different set of icons and public figures. Some mostly music, but also Alex Ferguson, Tony Wilson, and it's led to a process that if we can just go back to Pep. Yeah, when Pep Guardiola came to Manchester, he was quoted in an interview where you can hear it on BBC iPlayer, and he said, "It's not just football. This is Oasis country, Beatles country, Shakespeare country. This country is so much more than football. This place is so much more than football." And this is sort of great example of UK soft power working internationally. Of course, the millions on offer by Abu Dhabi to set up a new football team would have helped. But those are the quotes. We now move to, right. It's important to say that, pop music on its own did not create the new Manchester. There is a political context, and that context is that in fact, in 1987, to be precise, after 3 Conservative victories, Graham Stringer, the leader of the City Council, persuaded the Labour movement in Manchester to veer away from the confrontational approach they'd taken along that Derek Hatton, militant in Liverpool, had taken. We saw how catastrophic that had been, and they veered to a policy of collaboration, cooperation, and Stringer tells me in the book, he wrote a letter to the government saying we give up, i.e. we give up our left-wing hostile approach to the government. We want to work with the government. We want jobs and investment. And from that point, we had something called the Central Manchester Development Corporation, which worked with the council. It was half private sector, half public sector, worked with the council to bring in new buildings, such as we could just go back to the offices next to the Bridgewater Hall, which is where Harry is based. The arena, sponsored by various people since, and urban living in Castlefield. And you saw real early shoots of regeneration, city living, started to appear in Manchester. Manchester Airport was incredibly important in the whole process for a bunch of municipal socialists or former municipal socialists, they turn out to be very good business people. So Manchester Council set up something called Manchester Airports Group, got a second runway, the only dual runway airport outside of Heathrow, and started to make a lot of money. And that money, the airport is owned by majority Manchester, the other 9 boroughs, authorities of Greater Manchester also own a share. So from 2000 to 2020, 474 million dividends have come to Manchester Airport, and about smaller amounts to the other boroughs. And that what that did was, I suppose, oil the wheels, the political wheels. The councils were various times controlled by Lib Dem, mainly Labour, some Conservative, but they all realised that the airport was a cash cow, and they started to work together in a much more coherent way, leading to the Greater Manchester Authority that we have today. Let's return to hedonism for a moment. In the rave scene of the late 80s, early 90s, the hacienda, well, it was, fueled by drugs, partly, or mainly. Hacienda became a kind of a tabloid, it became a carnival of crime, really, drug dealing, etc., and everything that went with it. It became a byword for mayhem, gangs, and difficulties. I've got a whole chapter in the book about some of the episodes that took place, some difficult and dangerous, some quite funny. But what did Manchester Council do? Any city council in the world would have shut it down because it was notorious as well as famous. But Manchester Council could see that this was an important place. So they lobbied the police and the MP and the magistrates and said, we need this place kept open. This is the new economy, culture of tourism and leisure. And it's something that the factory founder, Tony Wilson, talked about a lot in the late 80s, early 90s. And Manchester Council listened to him. It's interesting to me that the department, culture until 1997 was called the Department for National Heritage. So it was all about history, all about old buildings. It was all about old stuff. It became the Department for Culture, Media and Sport in 1997. So the government got the message, understood what Wilson was saying 10 years ago, 10 years before that. Oh, in fact, just a little funny. Graham Stringer would welcome foreign business delegations around Manchester Town Hall. We would show them the statues and the Victorian history and the murals. They said, "Could get the hacienda," because they come from all over Europe and they wanted to go to this place that they'd read so much about. And this had an effect on local entrepreneurs. So you may have heard of Urban Splash, Tom Bloxham's company, and Carol Ainscoe, who was a woman who opened bars in the gay village. Basically, the crummy neighbourhood started to burst into life. And Manchester, these were independent people again. These weren't the big operators. They came later after the Indies had shown the way. Okay, so this is not a slogan, not a tagline, not a logo. This was the City Council turning to factory designer Peter Saville to be its creative director, and said to him, this came out of the idea of cities being brands. So Chester is a brand, whether we like it or not. It'll have meanings, associations for people, and cities have brands just like products do. People react to the mention of a city, they'll think of certain images, certain ideas. And Manchester asked Peter Saville to think of Manchester as a brand, and he came up with this not a logo. He called it a brand proposition or an organising concept. Manchester, he said, the first city of the modern world, and we are the original modern city. And he asked Manchester to think about itself and everything it did in that context. And so what it did as a result of that, just to go back, was create a festival of original new work, basically called the Manchester International Festival. First one was in 2007, and it has grown and grown and grown till we have this incredible building. It's divided opinion in terms of its aesthetics, but it is this huge new art space for cutting edge, avant-garde kind of art. Now, for me, having traced this process back to the late 70s, where the first manifestation of the factory movement was basically gigs in a bus drivers working men's club in a housing estate called Hume. It's kind of quite an amazing journey of kind of chain reaction, really, of culture and money and ideas. It's important to say that, again, just to bring back the twin track of culture and politics, that you have had a very business-friendly council at Manchester, led by Howard Bernstein on the top right there, who's quite recently retired, but was such a business-friendly, wily, respected and trusted operator by the government that George Osborne kick-started the factory project with an announcement in Parliament of £78 million back in about 2014. And he said, any child of the 80s will think this is a great idea. And to me, it's an incredible journey that Tony Wilson would never have foreseen, that Conservative Chancellor praising this anarchic DIY art movement from the 80s in the House of Commons. Of course, their relationship, Osborne and Bernstein, and the way Conservative governments have probably treated Manchester better than Labour administrations over the years is something that people have been intrigued and surprised to read about in my book. And that's because perhaps under the guise of a Labour council, strong Labour council, Manchester has been pursuing a very, very business-friendly approach to property developers in particular. Now we have a new sheriff in town, as it were, with Andy Burnham, and a bigger, Greater Manchester obviously representing all 10 boroughs. So the Hacienda to me was the first regeneration project of the new Manchester, quite simple. Let's have the next slide. That's what was on its membership form, the Rizian Members Club. That's what the owners, there's nothing about 2-for-1 offers or happy hours. It was intention to restore a sense of place. They, as I say, this excess of civic pride. City building was at the very heart of that project. And I would like to think that similar intentions have gone into places like this. That's what Manchester is today. It's led to a city where it's quite common for people to say Manchester's lost its soul, because it's very expensive. Rents are expensive, coffee is expensive. I think it's viewed by a lot of people in the north perhaps as way some of us have always viewed London. People who lived in Manchester for years say they don't recognise the old place anymore. It's because ultimately it's a place where people want to be, and that's led to the kind of problems that other cities might like to have that kind of problem. I went to Stoke to do this kind of a talk last week, and it looks pretty much like Manchester did in 1979 in vast parts of it. So we could say these are nice problems to have. They're certainly the problems of success, if you like. The fact that the Hacienda building, which was knocked down, rebuilt as apartments, it's got an estate agents in the window, in the ground floor, to me is quite a nice illustration of the fact that, for me, the Hacienda kind of seeded this property boom, and it's beyond irony, really, because with their art for art's sake kind of idealism, factory didn't care about profit. They didn't care if you bought the records. They were true artists. They just did it for themselves. And maybe that, what is the lesson for places like Chester? I think the place matters, and the way people feel about their place matters. That maybe artists can appear to be quite crazy, but maybe we should give them space and just not get in the way. I think artists shouldn't be should be clear of business and political agendas. I'm not a fan of Andy Burnham's habit of getting down with the kids and doing DJing in the Northern Quarter. I think he should put his tie on and go back to the office, because politicians always want something. I think, give the artists their space, is what I think. If you are feeling the urge to hear the story in a lot more detail or read it, you can do so by my book afterwards. Guardian have called it coolly analytical and hugely entertaining. I'll be signing copies afterwards. But, this is about Manchester. I know very little about Chester, apart from having a tour with Vanessa and Ben earlier today. All these cities have got their own characters, their own histories, their own identities. Maybe there are some general principles you could draw, but I think if I was offering any advice to Chester, it would be what is the city's place in the world today, and what is the essence of the city? Could it have a kind of a brainly exercise that it's not about a logo, not to end up with a logo or a slogan, but to help you understand what your city is and what it could be going forward. Thank you for listening. It's been good to meet people here today, and hopefully have a chat and drink with people afterwards in the bar.
Thank you very much, Andy. And now I'd like to introduce Simon Riley, Chief Operating Officer, Cheshire West and Chester Council. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know how you follow a summary of coolly analytical. Maybe as an accountant I am coolly analytical, but hopefully I'll express some of the passion that we see for our borough and for Chester as being part of our borough. As Tim said, Dale Curtis would have loved to been here, but we're in the pre-election period for Police and Crime Commissioner. Please go out and vote on the 2nd of May. But it does mean that we have to be extra cautious about either political representation here or sort of Della's in her role as the returning officer. So, as Tim said, I came here just under a year ago. So I was previously in Derby City Council as their Strategic Director of Resources, looking after all of the professional services and the finance. And I came to Chester, and I lived in Chester for 9 months in the hotels in Chester. And the advantage of some of the hotels in Chester is you look over the rooftops and you see demonstrable things that have happened and real opportunity for what could happen. And like when you come to a city like Chester, you say there are areas where we have cohesive plans about what we want to do, whether that be the city gateway around the station, 600 homes, public realm, whether that be Northgate, where we've proven cultural-led regeneration, got the units let, 2 million visitors to the market. We've got all of these metrics which actually indicate that what we are doing has had an impact of trying to create this as a vibrant and inclusive place. But we've also got the opportunity. You look around the city, you look at Northgate Phase 2, and you look at other sites and you go, isn't it nice that as we all come together to collaborate, we can shape the opportunities for those particular parts of the city and we make this a truly vibrant city? I think when I first met Tim after he finished talking after about 25 minutes and I had 5 minutes left, I raised a... Well, it's true. I suppose we raised the question of what do people see Chester as? Is it a heritage city? Is it a living city? Is it a university city? But in many ways, what we want it is to be a vibrant city, an inclusive city where everyone has that opportunity. So I suppose what I just want to explore a bit here is around how we can, in a sense, walk the walk, talk the talk, and actually this is about co-production, relationships, listening, and delivery. And I know people like Bence and Andy and everything else. We've met a couple of times, and something we are committed to as a council, and you've got to remember we were coming out of COVID, is how do we rebuild those positive relationships with people in the city? That might be the big partners, but it's also the representative groups, and it's also those who can help us co-produce this brilliant city that we want to represent. As a public servant, it's a great privilege to be in that role. We want to harness our collective knowledge and experience and work together to try and find and progress solutions to the priorities that matter most to our communities. But when it comes to it, the public sector is about facilitating, curating a series of outcomes for the people that we represent. That's 370,000 people within the borough. And over on the left, we did a lot of work last year, working right across the borough, the city, representative groups and partners, to create our borough plan. And it started with joint conversation. So instead of saying, here's our plan, do you agree with it or not? It's about getting the priorities that mattered. And we came out with 6 missions. And the purpose is play your part towards a stronger future. But I'd say play your part towards a stronger and inclusive future. And you've got then six missions there, starting well, tackling hardship and poverty, resilient people towards opportunity in local economy, neighbourhood pride and greener communities. And okay, it's sexy, isn't it? Everyone has missions now. But actually, missions is about changing. Missions is about how we work in partnership with people. And I think that's really important because I just want to read something here that I was given in preparation here, and I think it's quite important. There's a wide range of things that contribute to being an inclusive place, however big or small the geography, and they all have a part to play. At its heart, an inclusive place is one where every person in the community feels as though their lives are not limited by unequal access to education, work, housing, transport, health, and a whole host of other fundamental areas that we may take for granted. It also relies on a thriving economy where businesses are supported to prosper and expand. Local supply chains are the first and most effective option, and skills match the needs of the industries we have. How do we curate the future, which is Chester? And we want to do that through, as I said, co-production, relationship, listening, and delivery. So I think when we have a look at it, and I'm actually quite passionate about what we can do together. You've got the situation where, how do we do it? Firstly, it's about honesty. It's about saying that we've got lived experiences we can bring to the table. Some of those will be frustrated lived experiences, but let's bring them out and let's actually build and use that experience to build a better Chester. It's about giving a coherence to it and actually engaging in a way that's the creates a vibrancy, creates a buzz, creates a passion, creates a collective passion. And there's the one city plan that has already been mentioned, I think, but earlier. And it's about that vision, which is we're a unique city that prioritises inclusivity, sustainability to ensure a healthier, green and fairer future for all of its people. So our city plan, the one city plan as it's emerging in its next gestation, and all the engagement that we've had with you as individuals and collectively, is different. It's about, in a sense, collaboration, civic participation, but it's also setting down some of those tangible roadmaps for the future and looking at the various dimensions. This isn't necessarily exactly what it is in Manchester, and neither should it be. It's about what is right for Chester across the themes of across the themes of visiting, connecting, experiencing, being in, making. Andy talked about the power of creative communities. So what does it mean to have cultural-led regeneration? What does it mean about unlocking the potential of our people? What does it mean to be entrepreneurial? What does it mean about proving that confidence that people want to come and be in this city to create communities? And that can be on a whole range of things. It can be a major regeneration project, but it could be as simple as Groves in the Heart, creating inner city living for care leavers, which they have. And I think that's amazing. It might only be 15 homes in the city, but we're getting care leavers who we are corporate parents to come in to be in the city in a curated community. And I know Groves in the Heart are keen to expand that. It's about creating that sort of collective responsibility for partnership delivery as a council, and I've been the CFO of the councils. I'm still the Chief Finance Officer of this council, as well as leading all the professional services. You often get, what can you give us? And I'd say, what can we give together? Because that is what we have to do. We can no longer be a council that looks to do to, but we need to do with. And you can see in the description, it's about playing our part towards a collective future, and then you go into that cross-sticker strong around how we all play our part in there. But just maybe a couple of the areas that I just want to pick out. Though, to be honest, you will soon be able to go onto a website, www.chester1cityplan.com, and that is going to be our main hub for information, participation, collaboration. We want you to all be involved in the conversation. We want you to be involved in here. But just picking out some of the areas that we're investing in, like the destination Chester, which is an important part of being a heritage city. But the destination is more than just heritage. It's about what we've been doing in terms of assessing our state of play to create the foundations based on solid evidence for the future. But it's also about creating an events database, quality tours and performance monitors. Who do we know is coming into the city? Do we know what they're contributing to the city? Do we know what opportunities we're missing in the city to allow ourselves to be that destination? And the destination, as has been described, we often view it as visitor, but let's also have a look at it in terms of education. Let's also have a look at it in terms of a welcome mat. And something we're committing as a council is that we want to be in a situation when someone wants to come into the city, we actually have a conversation. So Dale Curtis has said to Gas, really, if anyone wants to come in the city, we want to be there within 4 weeks to have that conversation. And we all know the power of conversation is what gets people. We've got a very good offer, but how do we make sure that we are open for business and everything else? It's about creating a city accessible. So we've been doing a lot about active travel. We've been doing a lot about air quality, better bus networks. We've got a great opportunity with the HS2 money that is coming for us. We don't know when we're going to get it and what the profile is. But obviously that can help unlock some of that connectivity that we want. That might be connectivity within borough, It's also around regional partnerships like Growth Track 360, and the City Gateway will help us with that. And it's about everyone contributing to that local transport plan. How do we get our workers into the city? How do we get people to have a greater dwell time in the city? What is the experience they're going to have? It's about creating a living city. So it's about experiencing. So when people come here, and Andy talked about the number of people who lived in the city, and I was based just north of Manchester at the time. I was a shareholder of Manchester Airport for working for one of the boroughs. How many people lived in the city? How many people do we want to live in the city? Like, you got Mike from Crag and everything else, and that's a good voice to hear. But 600 houses in Chester Gateway, living above the rows. We want to create this vibrant city where people want to be here. It's their community. How do we curate a community? How do we create the sort of the students coming back into the city? Because a lot of our student provision is out of the city. How do we turn the direction of travel? How do we create those working spaces, work-live spaces? And with Annabelle coming from Stockton and all the experience, how do we create cultural hubs in the city? I was reading her Twitter account, as some of you may, and she talks about libraries and art centres and how privileged we are to have this connected cultural hub and Storyhouse. But how do we expand it into other areas? And I'm a great believer that cultural-led regeneration is at the core of what our One City plan will be. But it's not just about theatres, it's not just about libraries. It's about a sense of being, it's about a sense of community. Then you've got areas like, how do we make it feel a safe city? Because if we went out to people, they'd say, oh, we want to be a safe city. So we got Operation Momentum, which focuses on a proactive support for homeless people. Homeless people need to be valued. They need the right pathways. They need to be supported by us. We got the Purple Flag, which is about being a safe city. And we got many other things that maybe you see, like a spring clean of a rose, a protection system for the rose. All these things that you say, what does the council do? And actually the council is trying to, in a sense, curate a lot of these together and unlock and work in partnership with you. And then public realm. I think something that after 38 years in public service or whatever, I think public realm is really important. So how do we create that greenery? How do we create public realm? So you got things like the city heart around the town hall. We got reimagining the high streets. We got sort of Chester Gateway and Broughton Canal and Hallway sort of areas. All of this is really exciting. But in many ways, what we're saying is we do it for that left-hand part of that slide, which is about how do we create an inclusive, vibrant borough that we're proud to live in. The council workers, or me and 3,999 other council workers, are proud to represent, and where we work in partnership, listening, collaborating, planning and delivery. And people often say to me, because I'm a treasurer, well, how are you going to do that when you've got no money? Well, I flip it on its head and say that we spend as a council overall about £900 million, roughly £3 million a day. The public sector purse in the borough spends £2.7 billion, and that's before the private sector investment and the leverage that we have. It doesn't often require us to be the only funder to make that difference. Andy talked about Manchester, that it requires leadership, it requires that collaboration, and suddenly you become that place where people are confident to be, to invest in, and everything else. So just maybe to sort of conclude, I just want us to work with gas ambassadors, but work with you to say that we are open to building those relationships. So we now have regular meetings with gas, the university, the zoo, the bid, the Grosvenor estate, and others that we probably haven't come across yet. So we're open to coming and meeting you in your place, having those conversations, building on those conversations. So please take us up on the opportunity of that. We want us to be one council. A dysfunctional council is where you get passed around. And there may be a context coming out of COVID where we've had to relearn some behaviours because we stepped into COVID really well. But it also gave us a lot of empowerment because we said, throw away all the rules and we'll do what's right for the community. But a well-run council is one that has a proportionate set of decision making, a confident political leadership, and I say that across both parties. So the borough plan that formed that got the support of both the Labour and the Conservative groups, so probably 65 plus people voted that this was the right mission for us. I want us to be a good partner, and a good partner is that we will work with you to unlock, curate and facilitate. But please don't go away here thinking, well, we can fund everything. A, we can't, and B, it wouldn't be the right thing to do because it's not unlocking the potential of the city. I said that we want to be a curator and unlocker, and we want to do that at pace, but we want to do it where we're not coming back to the same issue in 5 years' time, because I know for many of you that is frustrated. And we are open to support from anyone in this room. If you have a skill set that you think can complement the council, and I know many of you are doing that in the One City plan working groups and the themed groups, please come and have those conversations, because I've come to Chester to be the Chief Operating Officer and also the CFO. I want my season in Chester, however long it is, either by political will or me deciding I've worked long enough, is I want it to be where I can come back when I retire and say, I worked with the council, I worked with the community and made Chester and Cheshire West a really inclusive place where opportunity is maximised, where we look out after our vulnerable and we actually make that difference. So hopefully that is a bit of an indication of, from what I'm saying, that I do think, and I'm told, that the council feeling and engagement is different. Some of that will be proof of concept as we go into that, but I think the building blocks are happening. And thank you to the gas ambassadors for effectively not holding us to account, because that isn't what they're there, but actually walking alongside us and being constructive and compassionate and challenging friends. So thank you to everyone here.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to hear these things, isn't it? Right, I'm now going to hand you over to the irrepressible Izzy Gray. I'm going to just change it up a little bit. So can I ask the 6 chosen members to come and drag a seat into the middle, and we'll have a bit of a Q&A, and then first one to the bar buys me a pint. Thank you very much.
Can you have a pint?
I can have a pint.
You can have a pint, okay. Come on, Colin. Just while we're moving you all, Colin, I have a question for you, which I'm afraid is off script.
Oh, right.
What number is your membership card for the Hacienda?
I was going to mention that. and I'm guessing I'm probably not the only person in here who is still got a very proud of their Hacienda card. Anybody else got one? Yeah, I knew there'd be a few people up there. Mine's about 9,000. I think but it
8,900.
No, I arrived in Manchester in September 1982, and the Hacienda opened in May. So I've really enjoyed Andy's book, and certainly knew some of the people and went to some of the events that he mentions. So.
Fantastic. Okay, so look at this wonderful 6 that we've got here. Dying to get into it. So we're going to start with you, Colin. Can you talk to us a little bit about the role of Destination Chester, and also about the tourism plan and how important that is right now?
Yes, thanks, Sissy. You've heard already from Simon about the 5 groups. There's 6 of us here today, but there's 5 groups that feed into the One City plan. One of which is visiting. what makes visiting different from each of the other groups is that it wasn't a new construct. There was already an organisation called Destination Chester, which was a coming together of all of the key players within the tourism sector, Marketing Cheshire, Chester Business Improvement District, the zoo, the racecourse, the Hoteliers Association, and so forth. They already had a group. They already worked together. So we adopted the role of being the visiting group for the One City plan because we already had this body here. We would have been reinventing something that was quite similar. One of our key tasks is to prepare a tourism plan or a tourism strategy for the city because, strange though it may seem, there hasn't been one for 25 years. Which seems remarkable, doesn't it, when you consider how important tourism is to Chester. Tourism's fitted in to things like there's been culture strategies, there's been heritage strategies, there's been wider place strategies, all of which tourism has had a part in, but there hasn't been a plan that goes into the level of granular detail that you need if you're actually going to drive actions rather than simply have aspirations.
You probably wrote the last one.
Actually, yes. Yeah, I've been around for far too long. But what comes out of it, and this relates back to what Simon has said already, is that we're short on resources. And so one of the key initiatives that we're working on at the moment is what Izzy referred to as the ABID. This is an attempt to find a new way of supporting tourism in Chester. As in any other city in the UK, the marketing of Chester for tourism purposes has been funded by two sources. It's been funded by public bodies through the local authorities, so effectively through local residents through their council tax, and it's been funded through businesses who have paid into individual campaigns or been members of organisations like Marketing Cheshire. Now, we can't expect more funding from either of those two sources. So we're looking to a third source. We're looking to the visitors themselves, and we're looking to emulate the model that has been successfully introduced in Manchester in the last year. So it's very appropriate we're talking about Manchester today, where visitors staying in overnight accommodation are invited to make a supplementary charge, or supplementary charges added to their bill, and that funding then goes in to support the product development and marketing of the city. It's very new. It's something that has only been done in Manchester so far, although lots and lots and lots of other cities are looking at it. However, we're quite a long way down the line. If we can get this over the line, and we're in discussion with the hoteliers, very deep levels of discussion with the hoteliers who would actually have to collect the money at the moment. They have to vote in favour of it. If we can get that up over the line, that could create a new £1 million a year, £1 million a year for marketing and product development for tourism in Chester. Now, that's what the city needs. What we know from our research is that over the last 5 years, the number of people staying overnight in Chester has increased, but the number of people actually in the city, walking around the city, visiting the city, has decreased. We all know why. It's changing consumer shopping habits. What we want to happen is that for tourism to play a greater role so that we can close that gap, so that tourism can play a greater part in Chester's future success than it has done hitherto. So that's what Destination Chester's all about. We're working really hard on it, and I have to say, Simon, officers in the council have been incredibly supportive in helping us get to this point.
Thank you, Colin. Any questions for Colin on that? We will do questions at the end.
Not decided yet. In Manchester, it's £1. And in Manchester, they've said that had they known how easy it would be to introduce it, they would have made it more. So we've done modelling based on £1 and £2. At the moment, we're leaning towards the £2 or working up to the £2.
Everywhere I go in Europe.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's half
Yeah.
a euro a person.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to give you some context, Cambridge are looking at it at the same time as us. They're looking at £2. Newcastle are developing it. They're looking at £3. So that gives you a kind of an indication. It's one of those things that it's going to be the norm in the next few years in the UK, just as it is, as you rightly say, across Europe.
Yeah. Thank you. Bence, what are your expectations from the group by placing a creative city in the heart of our vision?
Some of the themes of Creative City have been touched on today. Andy has mentioned quite a number of them, and Simon's touched on these as well. I think for the experience group, we felt very strongly that we lack a vision for Chester. And again, it's some of the things that Andy's touched on in terms of what is Chester, what does it want to be? And we're looking really at a number of aspects in terms of a creative city, and that's more cultural hubs. That's about placing the creative industries at the heart of the regeneration. So that's more the O Foundation, for example, and more workspaces, more startup facilities in Chester as well. One of the other aspects that I think it's fair to say I'm really grappling with, and please don't take this the wrong way, is I look around the audience and I look at the age of the audience.
Careful.
I'm not digging a hole here. But it's very much about what do young people want in a creative city for the future. A lot of us won't be around in 20, 30 years. And
Speak for yourself.
I'm reminded of a conversation I had just before Christmas. I can't recall who I was talking to. We were talking about the creative city and how we want to regenerate Chester. And two young lads who were very strong in their views joined the conversation, and after about 10 minutes, I think I do recall it sort of resonated with me. One of them said, it was F do you know about young people? And I remember then that's the time when we really need to be thinking about what young people want for the city. So one of the things we're looking at is, as part of a creative city concept, is really a project around defining we almost call it the time machine project, which is a case of, if you imagine some young person standing outside the garret looking over the city, 3, 4, 5 years time, for young people, what do they actually want to see? How will it manifest itself? So it's important that we actually have the thoughts and considerations of young people, but essentially for a creative city, we really want there to be a lot more spaces, places, and I think we can learn from a lot of other places like Brighton, what Hull has done. Simon's come from Derby, for example, Manchester and Liverpool. There's lots of other places that have led the way with creativity. So we should not be afraid to look at what they've done. But equally, we've got to be careful about not making it prescriptive. It's about trying to allow spaces to be created where that possibility of a sense of place and creativity and cultural perspective can actually take it a strong root.
Fabulous. Any questions for Bence? Una?
You talk about creative cities. I think we are a creative city. I think this is a product of us being a creative city, and I think there's been lots of grassroots projects that have led to this. I suppose my question is, if we want to attract young people, we need to have affordable housing. And one of the hugest issues that we have in the city is retaining talent and encouraging young people to be able to afford. Average house at the moment in rent is £1,250 in and around Cambridge or Hull, and that's for a 2-bed terrace property. Unless we can do something drastic and dramatic about the housing issue, most young people will not be able to afford to live in and around this city. So I think it's one thing saying we like these places, but for me, there's a bigger issue around this, around how you create the conditions for people to stay.
And I think, Una, to that point, you're spot on, and I think that's where working with the other groups, because again, my experience group doesn't cover some of those other aspects. So this is not a case of work in isolation. Yeah. There will have to be a lot of cross collaboration with the making group, for example, the being group, to ensure that, just having jobs and a creative environment isn't enough to attract and retain the young people who are going to other cities in Manchester, Liverpool, wherever.
Yeah, I think we'll probably talk a bit more about this, Una, when we get to Andy, but not yet. Not yet. Mike. Mike, welcome back from Australia. What have been your biggest surprises with the Being Group?
That how much work is actually being done behind the scenes that people don't realise. The Being Group is about being safe and clean. It's all the housekeeping stuff that happens around the city. I can just give you a couple of examples that have been pulled together in the last couple of months. What Simon referred in passing, one is protecting our heritage. And it's been a lot of work to understand who owns all the buildings in the city centre. We know who the tenants are, but who actually owns them? Where are they? And that information proved to be absolutely sensible together to install a single integrated fire alarm system across all the buildings in the roads. That's one piece of work that's been done, getting that data, so we can now roll out a single fire system to actually keep the roads safer. Secondly, looking at homelessness and rough sleeping. If visitors come to the city and they see a welter of homeless people and people rough sleeping, they'll think, does this city actually care? Does it care enough about its place? Does it care enough about its people? So several initiatives to actually address that, but not only, if you like, the disciplinary side of it, through trying to clamp down on drug dealing, but also putting money into building hostels and first step accommodation, so that you actually help the homeless and rough sleepers to have somewhere to go. So carrot as well as a stick. And also setting up the multi-agency rough sleeping organisation, MARS, that actually tries to actually understand the multiple issue challenges that people on the streets actually have. And realising that just to say, go to that agency, go to that agency, go to that agency, go to that agency, doesn't work. They actually help to take the first steps on the pathway back to leading a full life rather than being on the streets. And thirdly, on the clean, coordinating a city-wide spring clean in the week beginning the 12th of May. Cleaning the roads, cleaning the city centre, and cleaning also the roads. There's something what surprised me, the work that goes on behind the scenes. There's a quick summary of some things you might not be aware of that actually happen.
I have to say, walking around the rows as opposed to a few years ago now is a very, very different experience, isn't it? And Mike, I've got another question, just not on the main script. How can gas ambassadors best help the council, help us, and hence help Chester?
My philosophy in chairing Chester Association Group and also working with Gas Ambassador is that bricks are for building bridges, they are not for throwing at people. And I think that actually, if we recognise that the council officers are human beings, but they are limited in resource, they're limited in time, actually to build bridges and work with the council and work with the human beings in the council to actually build a common purpose and a common delivery. So that would be my answer to that question.
Okay, and also, shall we have a chat about Hynet? Is it now a good time?
Fine. One of the most exciting things for me, with a background, a lifetime in energy, is that the northwest, this area, is scheduled to receive £30 billion worth of investment, which in itself creates 30,000 jobs over the next 10 to 15 years. And one of the keynote projects within that is Hynet, the plant at Stanlow to actually make hydrogen. The council gave that a detailed and outlined planning permission back in January, and Hynet also the pipeline to take the carbon dioxide from that plant out to storage in redundant gas caverns under the RSC was in Minister's State approval just last week. It's real. So they're now starting to look at building that plant towards the back end of this year. That in itself will require somewhere between 2,500 to 3,000 new jobs. That's an opportunity not just for meaningful, well-paid careers in working towards net zero, but also all the spin-off benefits for all the activities in Chester and this region.
Thank you. Any questions for Mike? No? Okay. Andy, You have the biggest portfolio. What is your ask?
My ask.
How long have you got?
I think the ask is for some of the key messages which Andy came up with actually earlier on, is a recognition from people in Chester. I worked in Chester for 15 years, some 15 years ago. And I left Chester because it was getting too hard to do stuff. I was director of development of the city and moved to Warrington, and it was easy to do stuff. And go back to some of the things you said, that regeneration is hard. Regeneration is grimy and not terribly safe in many instances. You need to be determined and self-confident. And the problem we've had in Chester for many years, from my point of view, is that Chester's never pointed in the kind of same direction. And one of the things that Bernstein and other people did in Manchester, I worked with Howard, is he made sure that all the actors in Manchester pointed in that same direction. And I think this is what kind of GAS is all about, and what I'm trying to do in the making group is get those key actors in Chester, and you're some of those, is to point in the right direction, the same direction. That's not what you would individually want, but what the kind of where Chester needs to go, and that needs compromise, it needs working together, and it needs kind of leadership actually. And that's the other thing in my part, and for other people around this room and for you up there, provide that kind of single voice leadership for Chester, which to a degree has never happened before. And I plead for kind of Simon and the council to kind of share in that leadership, because kind of change requires that determination and leadership. So it's about involvement, yeah, but that, you know, sign up to where Chester needs to go, where we want to go, and play your part in leading that.
What are the transformational projects which the OCP Making Group sees as the highest priorities?
Right. The Making Group has, because we've got such a big agenda in the OCP, we have 10 working groups under the Making Group, each led by key actors in the city, three of which are on here. And they're leading partnerships of their own to deliver their priorities. Now, I've asked for those to come up with their 3 priorities, but 10 times 3 equals 30 priorities. So it's still a big agenda. But if I was to kind of boil things down to things that will make the biggest difference, one, I pick a kind of theme, which is creating a kind of the groundswell that is created Chester, because I think that would encompass the soul of the place. But if I was going to pick one overriding one, it would be to digitally connect this place properly. Because I could go on about, well, let's sort out training, and let's get let's get the economy going, but all that depends on connectivity. And even in the future, in terms of travel, that's going to be all about digital connectivity. So above all, I would put that. Look at me, Ben.
But just on that point, I mean, we've seen, again, if you look at successful cities across Europe and the UK, those that are smart, digitally connected city attract the best investment. So for Chester to at least get level, we have to improve the digital connection across the city.
So I would say smart digital.
Yes, smart.
Smart creative. Then looking at particular projects, there's the whole kind of city centre gateway and Bolton Canal corridor, which I think is one big sweep. And Simon says 600 houses at the kind of city centre gateway, which includes Bolton Canal corridor. That's over 1,000 houses.
And does this answer Una's question from earlier?
Yes.
Yeah.
The council doesn't build affordable houses anymore, and who can? Indeed, you've been selling off for yonks. But 30% of 1,000 homes is a significant number of affordable homes, and that's what the policy says, and that's what we have to work to think about. So 1,000 homes in that kind of arc, as well as Northgate and all the other potential sites for residential, a proportion of those being affordable will make a difference. Northgate 2, right in the heart of the place. But also, the Martin Group now own the former Debenhams and Grosvenor Centre. If we can get that heart back into the city, the kind of beating heart right at the centre of the city, get that occupied by a tremendous set of occupiers, then that would make probably the biggest difference.
And apparently some interesting conversations are happening, aren't they? Just staying with you, Andy, for a little bit. The mobilisation of the teams involved in terms of delivering. How is that going for the Making Group?
It's a bit slow, really, but it's getting there. I mean, these things always happen slower than you'd hope for, really. But there are 10 groups, each with, a number of people within them, all tackling their 3 priorities. Tony's leading heritage investment, good on you. Bence is leading digital, Mike, city centre living, and there's a raft of other ones, City Heart, which the university, the cathedral's leading, University City, which the university's leading. So we're gradually populating those as we speak, and they've set their 3 priorities each. And those leaders of those working groups now form the core of the Making Group, because what we wanted was not a set of people around a table who would like to listen to what's going on. We want a set of people who are leading things going on. So those sets of people are a set of deliverers around the table. And we're involving those people who can make a difference. Sorry, Randy. It's going a bit slow, but I think we're getting there. And the key thing is now for those people to play their parts.
Yeah. And we have to remember these are volunteers.
Yes.
Always. Tony B. Hello. The D House has been a thorn in the side of the council for 30 years. Is it 30? Yeah, okay. What makes you think you can get traction now?
Easy one, Tony. Yeah. Well, first of all, something that Tim said, and certainly something that Andrew said, reminded me of when I was a student in Manchester in 1977. And Charles Jenks, the great architectural writer and philosopher, was invited to Manchester. And we just thought, Charles Jenks coming to Manchester? Good grief, everybody was there. And he started off his talk and said, it's great to hear in Manchester. And he knew how special it was then. And he said, I can't wait to have a proper look round at all your lovely old warehouses. And people laughed. A bit like some of you did when that picture of D House came up. Now, 5 years later, all my fellow students were working on Manchester warehouse conversions. Because the external investment came in, people suddenly looked at themselves in Manchester and saw how special Manchester was. It wasn't the S-hole that we were all being told. It's a special place. Chester's a really special place, and D House is a special place. So, as Andy just said, we're now getting our arrows pointed in the right direction, in the same direction. We've all seen Gladiator. I think we've all been convinced that the Colosseum isn't buried underneath D House. There's nothing there. It's a fossil. Knock D House down. What are you going to do? Have a big hole in the ground that nobody's going to go to? What are you going to do with it? It's ridiculous. 2,000 years of history on one site. That's our history. That's Chester's history. And the building looks a bit of a mess at the minute. It's looked like a big mess for 30 years. We haven't done anything with it. It's a special building. Where we are now, and it's time has come, is those arrows are more or less pointed in the right direction. Not only do we think we're going to keep D House and turn it into something special, but the heritage authorities are realising they've sat on their arses, for 30 years and done nothing with it. And it's in a hell of a state. So we have to take a really robust view on what we can do with it. We have to open its doors and make it development friendly. Make it so that a developer will say, oh, I might actually be able to go in there and make some money. Developers make money. So that's where we are, and the council's really on board now as well. There are people all just trying to get that going. It's faltering, it's 3 steps forward, 2 back, but we are getting there. But its main thing is, look where it is. Next to the walls, Grosvenor Park, by the river, on a Roman amphitheatre, the biggest Roman amphitheatre in the country. And if we can get D House turned into something and allow us to extend it, add value into the site, the amphitheatre will follow. We'll have some proper public realm, a really special public space that people will want to come to instead of tripping over when they accidentally come and say, "What's this?" That's my answer.
Fantastic, fantastic. Any questions for Tony?
About 40 years ago, didn't that? Mr. Tony Barbetta, a number of people here will know, had a scheme for the amphitheatre and D House.
Yeah.
To convert it into something like the Jorvik Centre.
And we were fighting all against each other. Yeah. I went to the lecture where Dominic Trudell from the Jorvik Centre, we were looking at that thing. But we were fighting about it. There were arrows going that way, and arrows going that way. And now, I think that said, arrows point in the same direction. Any organisation has to have everybody brought into the same direction. So I think we've all just got over the romantic idea of digging up the Colosseum, and we've got a special place that may make it even more special.
Timescales, Tony, can you give us any indication? Sorry.
I thought it took 5 years, Tony.
We're working with the council, and we've got to take a step. The council are just waiting. I'm just waiting for the council. They're busy. People are being on holiday.
By the time we sit here this time next year, we're going to have some really solid answers.
You're going to have a direction, just like in Manchester. Andy, you bang a pipe. I'll tell you about Hume and what really happened leading up to Joy Division. 5 years, 10 years. 5 years would be great.
5 years would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. Helen, there you are, our green and eco champion of the city. Tell us about Chester Green Weekend. Tell us why it's so important. It's the first event, but more importantly, tell us how local businesses, local people can get involved and really help enable this.
I'm going to go a bit off piece, a little bit, just because I just wanted to say that, I came to Chester 30 years ago from Greater Manchester for work, and now the business that I'm a partner in is based in Manchester again. But I'm so committed to Chester that I cannot leave. I am here to stay. I've lost my son back to Manchester. So he was born here. He's gone living in Greater Manchester. But although I might work in Manchester, although in theory virtually work in Manchester, my heart and everything I do in my spare time is committed to Chester and Cheshire. I've just wanted to turn where we are now into the Bristols, the Hebden Bridges, because I work in that eco space. And I'm convinced that there's loads of people like me here. I sometimes go on social media when the council posts and think perhaps I'm wrong, but I'm just really sure that everybody deep down wants to do something different and be kind to the environment and think about climate change. And so Chester Gas, as being an ambassador, has brought 3 of us in the city, or 3 groups that are in the city together, as something called Chester Green Weekend. And that is Green Expo, which Neil and Mike and Jane are involved in. And Sustainable Cheshire, Eco Communities, which got a raft of the team up there that are involved in. And AT Fest, which Stephen, somewhere I've seen him in.
Active Travel Fest,
sorry.
There he is.
Plus loads more, and obviously you're as well. So all of us are part of the GAS, or the main people are part of GAS, and we decided we would do something that brought us all together on the 15th of 16th of June this year as Chester Green Weekend. And we've got the fantastic Oak Design Foundation desperately want to get involved with us as well, of course. Don't look at me confused. You are. Monica, you are involved in it as well. So there's going to be so much going on in Chester that weekend, whether it's active travel, whether it's eco stuff, whether it's loads of innovation ideas.
And a local food and drink,
And
produce
local
trail.
food and drink supported by Izzy, of course, with her project. What I need you to do today is, when you leave, A, pick up a Tellers magazine, and B, pick up a leaflet, which was kindly very quickly printed this evening by our chairman, because literally this has been going on and we've been so fantastically excitedly sorting this all out for today's deadline. But I have managed to get us Aviva crowdfunding matched bidding. So anything you put on, even if you just go home and put £5 on, that gets match bid by Aviva, and that gives us a tenner to help make it happen. We get 10,000 special maps sorted out by Izzy
On
and her
recycled
project.
paper, obviously.
You know what? There's a load of magazines out there. Recycled paper, yes, great. So there's going to be a real great vibe around Chester that weekend. I'd like to see you nodding. That weekend and in the run-up, because it's part of Great Big Green Week. So if you're in the audience, you have a business and you want to get involved, you want to do something in the week or over the weekend, or you've got your own little business and you want to stall in Grosvenor Park over the weekend, catch me or one of the team. I'll get a leaflet or email us, and that is what's going on in Chester in June. We are truly going to make Chester a green. It's been 30 years I've been trying to do this, but at some point in my lifetime we're going to make Chester a green city. I've got nods from the panel. I've got some nods from the panel.
Just on the green point, the super trees, Singapore, all that. Whatever happened with I remember seeing here, and it's euphoric about the super trees and the green entrance to Chester and all the rest of it, and various other things in the one city about Henry the North, and all these sort of magnificent aspirations. Just the trees is one. What's actually happened to that?
There are some members of the Super Trees team here tonight. They are there. You know what? You can't make stuff grow as much as you sometimes would like. But it is growing, isn't it, John? It is there and it is growing and it does look great.
So is it John? Is it John who's in charge? Right, so after the drink in the bar, John, you need to have a chat with John.
Yeah, John.
He's here.
Yeah.
Tremendous people we're presumably invited from Manchester and down the M6 and 56 and all the rest of it. We're all going to come past the super trees and notice nothing like that.
Do you know, it's actually a really good point, isn't it? And we can, I think what's really important is that we actually have a look at that and we can get back to you. So we'll take your details. I'm sure that you know people here.
The first time he told me about this, I said, "Oh, what about the super trees?"
Yeah.
So
We'll get back to you with what we know.
They're doing some great work. We just perhaps need to help you spread that message a little bit wider.
It's the winter as well.
Yeah, it is winter.
No, but anything that we can't answer, we'll get back
it rains a lot because of climate change as well. Just going to put that out there, which is why you need to come to our special weekend.
Okay, any more questions for Helen? No? Okay. Massive round of applause. We're not doing what? Okay. So, okay, that's it. Tony's telling me that's it. Massive round of applause, please, for our fantastic song. I'm handing over to Tony.
We need to see the seat.
Good evening all, I'm Tony Swindells. I am one of the founder members and directors of GAS that you've heard all about tonight. I'm also one of the founders of the O Design Foundation that you've heard so much about, and probably primarily I'm just someone who passionately believes in Chester and its future. I need to first off thank everybody because we have run over time. It is warm in here. So thanks for coming, thanks for listening, and most of all, thanks for giving a shit on this really wet Thursday night. So I hope you found it informative and inspiring, and we hope that it filled you with a belief and enthusiasm to come and join us, to get stuck in, as Tim said. And also to creatively collaborate with everyone that's in the room tonight and everyone that's part of GAS. Our message is to simply make Chester the best place to live, work and play, full stop. We hope you like hearing from Andy Spinoza, and thank you very much for that, and how Manchester did things. But I want to stand up and stress, we don't want to be Manchester. We're not Manchester, we're Chester. We want to be ourselves, and we want to build on the beautiful heritage and the beautiful past and all the amazing businesses and all the things that are unique and makes Chester Chester. But we have to stop working in silos. We've said this time and time again, and we have to think beyond the Romans. In addition to that, we also do need to look at other cities. We asked Andy to come here tonight to talk about Manchester because it did something bloody awesome, okay? We have to look to cities like Manchester. How did they achieve it? You know, why did they do what they want to do? What drove them to do these things? They're the lessons we need to learn. It's not about emulating these cities. It's about learning from how we got there. And I think that's really important. And within that, for me, the biggest takeaway from tonight has to be the public and the private sector collaborating and working together. It's a massive, massive culture shift in this city to think that the council and the private sector are going to come together and work collaboratively. And as Simon said, he's absolutely right. The city council are an enabler, and that's what we need them to be. The private sector and our residents have to rise up to the challenge of making this city amazing. Not moaning about all the bad stuff that's been done or didn't happen or blah, blah, blah. But we need to rise up to the challenge. We need to tell the council what is stopping that transformation. What red tape is in the way? What red tape can they help remove? What policy can they put in place to help support transformational change? That is what they're here for. And you've heard it tonight. They want to listen. Okay? So, I don't know where the hell I am on my speech now because I get so impassioned about these things, okay? What we did say is that we want our council to roll out the welcome mat. We want a welcome mat that starts at the council's doors and extends all the way out to the great, great opportunities we have in this city. We need to come together with the council and stand behind a bold and ambitious shared vision for Chester. We need to promote this vision far and wide and make this vision the cornerstone of our city's future. We talked a lot about the One City Plan tonight, and I'm not here to say anything bad about the One City Plan. What I'm here to say is the One City Plan is a starting point, okay? The One City Plan's great, 45 actions by 2045, but the reality is it's not simple and concise enough. It doesn't have a single clear vision and purpose that the public can understand in a few words and get behind. And that is really important. That is something we need to do. You heard it from Andy tonight. 3 words in Manchester's vision. 3. And one of them was Manchester. But it was understandable and people could get behind it. Our One City Plan is a massive document. We need to help the city boil that down into something that the public and the private sector can get behind and get behind with passion and true belief. So, predominantly at the top of that list, we need to be a yes city. I am sick of Chester being a no city. We've got to be a yes city. We want the council to work with us to remove the red tape and put policy in place to support development and investment. We will do this through a shared creative vision. Andy talked about it tonight, an organising vision and a can-do culture which is in every strand of our DNA. Our key job as residents and businesses of this city is to go out as positive ambassadors and tell everyone we can get the ear of how amazing this place is, not what the city did deliver and the city didn't do. If we continue down that route, we will continue to achieve nothing. So collectively, we need to be positive. Finally, we want to make sure, and this is where the city can come into play, that there is an infrastructure in place, digital and physical, that will support the future vision of our city. So, what is the future vision of our city? We're all going to have a different take on this, but for me, I believe in harnessing the power of the creative industries to regenerate and reimagine our cities, high streets, and communities. That's my idea. It doesn't mean it should be everybody else's idea. So, I invite you to give feedback on the app. What is your creative Chester? What is your future city of Chester? And perhaps most importantly, what are you going to do to help us and the council get there? So that's my call for action, I think. I have some thanks to do as well, so slightly less bubbly here now. So we want to think big, but we want to thank big too. Gas has been going a year, and we could not have gone for a year and made the difference that we have without the Abode Hotel for allowing us to have our meetings there every couple of weeks and providing us endless tea and coffee, the Storyhouse for the venue tonight, Louise for opening up, Andy Spinoza for giving us his take on Manchester and what they needed to do. Key message there being that the public and private sectors came together and they had a single concise vision. Simon for giving up his evening. Thank you very much, Simon. Izzy for the Q&A. All the fellow ambassadors, and then everybody who's kind of made this work on the floor tonight. Aki, Clara, Sam on video, Vanessa, Pam, Kevin, too many to mention. And lastly, we want to give yourselves a round of applause for sitting here for 2 hours. Thank you very much. Okay, so before you all go, there's always a takeaway, okay? And my takeaway for this evening is clear, confident, collaborative leadership. We don't have a Phil Redmond or an Andy Burnham or a Howard Bernstein. We don't. But what we do have is the power of connectivity and to lead by collaboration and creativity. What we also have is you. I've never been to a city where you can connect with so many people directly every day that give a damn and are able to affect change. We need to leverage that power. Okay, so when you go out here tonight and while you're waiting for the bar staff, get on the app, Rob's One City app. Give us some feedback. We don't want more work to do. We want help and support. That's what we want. This evening is about collaboration. So go and say hello to 2 people you don't know while you're in the bar and come up with an awesome idea for how we're going to make Chester absolutely fantastic. And remember, culture breeds capital, okay? And that we need to restore a passionate sense of place in our city. Thank you all for being here this evening.